After rescuing the girl from her alcoholic father, Navy SEAL Andrew Hayes believed the worst was finally behind them. With her father in custody, it seemed Emily could start building a normal life at last. But the system had other plans, and Andrew would soon realize that Emily's fight for safety and healing was far from over. Before we dive into part 2 of this incredible story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe. A cool breeze swept through the parking lot of the police station as Andrew and Emily stepped out of the car. Emily hesitated slightly, her exhaustion from the day's events showing in her slumped shoulders and tired eyes. A middle-aged officer with a kind face guided them toward the glass doors. "This way, please," he said softly but firmly. "We'll get you settled in no time." As they walked through the station's corridor toward the social worker's office, a commotion to their left caught Emily's attention. Her father, James, was being led toward the booking area by another group of officers. She froze mid-step, her expression a mix of concern and sadness as she watched his slouched figure disappear around the corner. Andrew noticed her hesitation and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let's go," he said quietly. "We should let the police do their work." Emily nodded, her eyes lingering on the spot where her father had vanished before she turned to follow Andrew and the officer. The faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead created a surreal atmosphere as they continued down the corridor. When they reached a door marked Social Services, the officer knocked twice before opening it. Inside, a woman in her late 40s with graying hair and kind eyes stood up from behind her desk. "Hello," she said warmly, her tone professional yet gentle. "I'm Mary Gardner, the social worker assigned to Emily Larson's case. Please come in and have a seat." Emily sank into a chair opposite Mary, the weight of the day pressing heavily on her small frame. Andrew took the seat beside her, his posture alert despite his evident fatigue. Mary leaned back slightly in her chair, her focus shifting to Emily. "Emily, I know this has been a difficult day for you," she began. "I'm here to ensure you're safe and cared for. Can you tell me if there are any family members we can contact?" Emily hesitated, glancing at Andrew before looking back at Mary. Slowly, she shook her head. "No," she said softly. "It's just been me and Dad for a long time." Mary nodded, sympathy evident in her expression. "I see. In cases like this, when there are no immediate family members available, we usually arrange emergency foster care for minors. It's a temporary solution to make sure you have a safe place to stay while everything is sorted out." Emily's eyes widened slightly, fear flickering across her face. "Foster care," she whispered, her voice trembling. Andrew leaned forward, his concern clear. "Isn't there any alternative?" he asked. "She's already been through so much." Mary sighed, her tone still gentle but firm. "I understand, but it's a legal requirement. We have to ensure Emily is in a safe, supervised environment, especially given the circumstances." The tension in the room felt palpable, the buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead amplifying the weight of the discussion. Just as Emily opened her mouth to respond, a sharp knock on the door interrupted them. "Come in," Mary called, surprise evident in her voice. The door swung open, revealing an elderly woman in the doorway. Her dignified appearance was slightly offset by signs of a rushed journey, an askew cardigan and stray wisps of gray hair escaping her bun. Emily's reaction was immediate and startling. Leaping from her chair, she cried, "Grandma!" The sudden exclamation made everyone in the room jump. Relief and joy lit up the woman's face as she opened her arms. "Emily, my dear girl," she said, her voice warm and slightly breathless. Mary and Andrew exchanged surprised glances as Emily ran into her grandmother's embrace. The woman held her tightly, one hand stroking Emily's hair while murmuring soothing words. After a moment, she looked up and met Mary's confused gaze. "I'm Victoria Jensen," she said steadily, emotion still evident in her voice. "I'm Emily's step-grandmother." Victoria gently released Emily and stepped forward, extending her hand first to Mary, then to Andrew. "Thank you," she said, her grip firm. "Thank you for saving my granddaughter." Andrew nodded, still processing the unexpected development. "I'm glad I could help," he said simply. Mary cleared her throat, her professional demeanor returning. Miss Jensen, I'm a bit confused. Emily told us she had no family we could contact. Emily, now back in her seat, looked down at her hands. I, I wasn't sure if I should bother Grandma, she said softly. We haven't seen each other in a long time, but she was always nice to me. Victoria's expression softened as she turned to Emily. Oh, sweetheart, you could never bother me. She turned back to Mary, her face growing serious. I'm James's stepmother. His father married me after James's mother passed. I tried to love James as my own, but her voice trailed off, a hint of old pain flickering in her eyes. It's been 8 years since I've seen James or Emily, Victoria continued. James, he never accepted me. As he got older, he grew distant and eventually cut off all contact. He wouldn't let me visit Emily. Mary nodded, jotting notes as she listened. I see. And how did you hear about today's events, Miss Jensen? Emily reached out, her small hand trembling slightly, and her grandmother, Victoria, clasped it firmly. A neighbor had called me. We've kept in touch over the years, and as soon as she saw the police at James's house, she let me know immediately. I came as fast as I could, Victoria said. Mary, the caseworker, asked cautiously but with a hint of hope in her voice, and you're willing to take custody of Emily? Victoria nodded, without hesitation. Absolutely. I have a spare room. I'm financially stable, and I've already missed so much of Emily's life. I want to be here for her now, if she'll have me. Emily looked up at her grandmother, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Really? She whispered, her voice filled with tentative hope. Victoria squeezed her hand gently. Really, sweetheart? If that's what you want. Mary leaned forward, her expression serious. Miss Jensen, I'll need to conduct a thorough evaluation to ensure you're a suitable guardian. Can you provide some details about your current living situation and financial stability? For the next hour, the office buzzed with conversation as Mary conducted the evaluation. Victoria answered questions about her home, income, health, and her ability to care for a teenager. Meanwhile, Emily sat quietly, her hands still clasped tightly in her grandmother's, as though afraid to let go. The sun was setting outside the window, casting a warm, golden light across the room when Mary finally set her pen down with a satisfied nod. Well, Miss Larson, everything seems to be in order. Given the circumstances and with Emily's agreement, I believe placing her in your care is the best solution. Emily's face lit up with the first real smile of the day. Really? I can go with Grandma? She asked, her voice full of wonder. Mary smiled warmly. Yes, Emily. Your grandmother meets all the requirements to be your legal guardian. You won't have to go into foster care. Andrew, who had been quietly observing the process, felt a wave of relief. The warm family moment before him was a stark contrast to the tense, fearful atmosphere earlier in the day. As Mary began preparing the paperwork, Andrew caught Emily's eye and offered her a reassuring nod. For the first time since they'd met that morning, Emily looked hopeful about her future. The fluorescent lights in the station seemed harsher now, casting stark shadows as the group left Mary's office. Victoria held the freshly signed custody papers in one hand, while her other arm wrapped protectively around Emily's shoulders. Andrew walked slightly ahead, his military training evident in his alert, purposeful posture. They were nearly at the exit when a commotion from a nearby corridor caught their attention. Andrew's instincts kicked in, and he moved to shield Victoria and Emily as a group of officers rounded the corner, escorting James. His earlier drunken aggression had faded, replaced by a cold, calculating hatred that seemed to radiate from him. James's eyes swept over the group, narrowing when they landed on Emily and Victoria. For a moment, he remained silent, content to glare as he passed. But then his gaze shifted to Andrew, and his face contorted with rage. You, James spat, lunging forward against the officer's grip. You'll regret this. His voice echoed through the corridor, causing the officers to tighten their hold. Emily flinched, pressing closer to Victoria, who instinctively held her tighter. Andrew stood his ground, his expression unreadable, meeting James's furious glare without flinching. Mary stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Mr. Larson, I suggest you focus on your own situation right now. James snapped his attention to Mary, sneering. You don't know anything. None of you do. You think you're helping, but you're just making things worse. One of the officers restraining James gave him a firm shake. That's enough. Move along. As they led James away, he called over his shoulder. This isn't over, Emily. Do you hear me? This isn't over. Emily buried her face in Victoria's side, her shoulders trembling. Victoria stroked her hair, whispering soothing words too soft for the others to hear. Andrew watched James disappear down the corridor, his jaw tightening. Only when James was out of sight did he relax slightly. Turning back to Victoria and Emily, he asked softly, Are you both all right? Victoria nodded, though her face was pale. Yes, I think so. Emily, sweetheart? Emily looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She nodded silently, managing a weak smile. I just want to go home. Can we go now? Victoria squeezed her hand. Of course, sweetheart. If Miss Gardner says it's okay, we can leave right away. Mary nodded, her expression sympathetic. Yes, I think that would be best. I'll make sure to note this incident in the file. It could affect any future custody hearings. Andrew's face was grim.
Good, he said.
Is there anything else we need to do here? Mary shook her head. No, you're free to go. The officers will keep us updated on Mr. Larson's case, and we'll pass that information along to you, Miss Larson. Victoria nodded, her arms still around Emily. Thank you for everything, Miss Gardner. As they stepped out into the cool evening air, Andrew hung back slightly to speak with one of the officers. Please keep me informed about James Larson's case, he requested quietly. The officer nodded, making a note. Of course, sir. We'll keep both you and Miss Jensen updated on any developments. Andrew rejoined Victoria and Emily as they walked to the car. The day's events had taken a toll, but as Victoria drove them home, a sense of cautious optimism began to take hold. They were finally moving forward, one step at a time. After the scene he caused at the bus station, did you even contact the bus company to confirm the event with the driver? Sir, we've investigated the case according to our protocol, the officer explained, his tone apologetic but firm. He's been released with a court date, and there's a permanent custody removal order for the girl. He's not allowed near her. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. And you think that'll stop him? The doctor carefully examined Emily's residual limb, noting the extensive bruising as she applied a cold compress. Do you currently have plans for a prosthetic? She asked. We may need to delay any fitting until this heals. The pressure from a prosthetic could worsen the bruising and potentially cause ulceration. Andrew, who had been hovering nearby, spoke up. I know a military doctor who specializes in prosthetics. Would it be okay if I reached out to him for a consultation? The doctor nodded. Of course. It would be great to get a specialist's opinion. As the doctor continued treating Emily, Andrew stepped out to make the call. Dr. Jonathan Emilio Ray answered promptly. Jonathan, it's Andrew. Remember that case I mentioned? There's been a development. The girl's residual limb is bruised. Any chance you could come by the hospital to take a look? Dr. Ray's tone was calm and professional. Of course, Andrew. In the military, we often deal with bruising and injuries around prosthetic sites. Depending on the severity, there are therapies and medications to help prepare her arm for fitting. If the bruising is minor, it might still be safe to proceed after some rest and proper care. I'll stop by first thing in the morning to assess the situation. Also, if you're open to it, we could discuss a myoelectric prosthetic. It's a more advanced option that uses sensors to detect muscle movements, allowing electronic control. It significantly reduces strain compared to cable-operated devices. Andrew returned to the room and confirmed with the attending doctor that the bruising was minimal. Relaying this to Dr. Ray, he received reassurance. That's good news, Dr. Ray said. Cold compresses and medication should suffice for tonight. There's no need to worry for now. Relieved, Andrew thanked him and ended the call. As the night settled, the bustling ER quieted. Emily sat on the edge of her hospital bed, staring at the cold compress on her limb. The day's events weighed heavily on her, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Maybe I shouldn't get the prosthetic after all, she murmured, avoiding Andrew's gaze. It feels like my arm just causes problems for everyone. Dad always said it made me a burden. Andrew moved to sit beside her, his voice steady and firm. Emily, listen to me. Your arm isn't the problem here. What your father did, that's on him. His choices, his addiction, they're not your responsibility. Emily glanced up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. But if I was normal— You are normal, Andrew interjected, his tone leaving no room for argument. You're a brave, strong young woman who's been through more than most people can imagine. You're going to get through this. That prosthetic will help you live the life you deserve, a life no one can take away from you. The ER doctor, overhearing their conversation, added warmly, I've seen so many patients with prosthetics regain their independence. They work, play sports, and live full lives. Many of them come from tough situations, too. The doctor perched on the edge of the bed. Can I share something personal with you? She asked gently. When Emily nodded, the doctor began. I grew up in a broken home. My parents always told me I wasn't smart enough to become a doctor. But I had a teacher in high school who believed in me and helped me see my potential. That belief made all the difference. Now, I get to help people like you every day. Emily listened intently, a glimmer of hope returning to her eyes. Really? She asked softly. Really? The doctor replied with a smile. Don't let anyone, not even your father, define what you can or can't do. You have so much potential, Emily, and a prosthetic is just one tool to help you reach it. As she finished speaking, Victoria returned to the room, her MRI completed. The tearful reunion between grandmother and granddaughter was filled with relief and love. Andrew, giving them space, handled the hospital paperwork. When he returned, he shared an update. I spoke with Dr. Ray. He's coming by tomorrow morning to look at your arm. He thinks there are therapies that might help, even with the bruising. Emily's eyes widened slightly. Really? Even after everything? Andrew nodded, smiling. Really? He's dealt with injuries like this before. We're still on track for getting you fitted soon. For the first time that day, a tentative smile appeared on Emily's face. Thank you, she whispered. Later that evening, Andrew drove Emily and Victoria home. The silence during the ride was heavy, each lost in thought about the day's events. When they arrived, the front yard, once peaceful, now felt marred by the memory of James's violence. Emily hesitated at the edge of the driveway, her gaze fixed on the door. Victoria placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. It's okay, sweetheart.
We're home now.
We're safe. Inside, the house bore the aftermath of James's rage. Overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and evidence markers remained. Without a word, Andrew began tidying up. Slowly, Victoria and Emily joined him, working together to restore the home's order. As Emily struggled to lift a side table, she muttered, this would be easier with 2 hands. Then, to Andrew's surprise, she added with a wry smile, I guess I really do need that prosthetic. Victoria chuckled softly, relieved. Once you get it, I'll teach you all my secret family recipes. You'll be a master chef in no time. Emily's eyes lit up. Really? You'd teach me to cook? Of course, Victoria replied warmly. We've got a lot of lost time to make up for. As they continued cleaning, the mood shifted. Restoring the space felt therapeutic, reclaiming it from James's shadow. Finally, Andrew spoke up. All this cleaning is making me hungry. How about we order dinner? Victoria and Emily exchanged a glance before laughing, the sound breaking the tension in the air. Victoria smiled. How about I cook us something instead? In the kitchen, the 3 worked together, preparing a simple but hearty meal. As they ate, the lingering fear and uncertainty began to fade, replaced by cautious optimism. Though challenges lay ahead, in this moment, they were together, safe, hopeful, and ready to face whatever came next.